Greetings, welcome to another video. So I received a comment question that will help me better to explain the idea of forces of consciousness, which are the planets that are in our solar system. So the series I've been doing, it's called The Forces of Human Nature, but you could say it's the forces of our higher human nature. And why are the planets, how are they giving us the energies that they give us? There's so many different kinds of avenues you could go down. So this video, I want to touch into a couple interesting topics that will help you visualize a little bit better about how the planets are actually giving us these energetic qualities that they do. So Jeremy asks this question: I always wondered if the reason that talks about characters in the Bible and ancient priest kings from Egypt and Sumeria living to be hundreds or thousands of years old, if it was because of a pre-diluvian or whatever caused the cataclysm may have altered the rotation of the earth, changing the atmosphere, but also if the earth's spin and rotation around the sun may have been faster before the cataclysm, which would make the days and years pass at a different rate, affecting our measurement of time. So as you can see, there's some hypotheticals that we can investigate, and many researchers investigate these antediluvian times and how ancient cultures were seeing the cosmos, and of course obscured histories and cover-ups in history. But essentially the heart of his question is the Earth's spin and rotation around the sun having been faster before an epic cataclysm, which would have made the days and years pass at a different rate, affecting our measurement of time. So basically, was time felt differently in the past? And was time different in the past because of how our solar system having been affected in some way because of a massive Earth-altering event? So I dealt with this idea in the first episode of my series, The Cycle of Earth's Ages, discussing the mathematics and theories around the Vedic Yuga cycle. So there is a very stark anomaly that happens that is in the ancient Vedic texts that describe the Yuga cycle, and that is that their calculations for the cycle are for 360 what they call divine years, and divine years are years of the demigods, and 1 year for a human being is just 1 day for demigods. But it's that number 360. So we're talking about revolutions of 360, cycles of 360. And 360 is a perfect circle. It's the perfect ecliptic circle that the sun travels around. But first, go back and watch that full video if you're interested in a complete background about the fascinating subject of the Earth's ages. And then I go through in each episode detailing each age and how each age is felt. So, but the anomaly it's a mystery. It is, why was 360 used to measure the years of the demigods and not 365.25 or 0.2422, the exact amount of days it takes for the sun to make one complete revolution in the sky? So the supposedly perfect system that the Vedic mathematicians use is using derivatives of 360, not 365, and they were supposedly the most advanced civilization. So that says, was at some point in time 1 year, 360 days, the perfect circle days, and not 365. Those kind of decimal points, it seems like something got thrown off. And so that's one of the sources of why people say that something got skewed or the Earth was shifted in some way, because we don't have this exact 360 calculation, but rather 365. It seems a little bit off. So the theory or the hypothetical question is, what changed? Did something change or did nothing change? But I'll dig into that now a little bit and to help give some context. So I recommend for everybody studying astrology, I always recommend to do astrology and to understand our Earth realm from the point of view of the Earth. And it's going to help you wrap your head around what is happening in the sky and how transits work from a far more practical point of view, and it'll give a lot more clarity. Just take where you are and look up and observe what you can see in the sky, and don't rely on the visualizations and kind of models that depict the Earth in a certain way. Always come back to where you are and observe what's happening above you. It's the simplest way to do it. It's how the ancients did it. And don't forget, all astrology that has ever been produced is geocentric, seeing us from the Earth perspective, that the Earth is this fixed place and the planetary bodies or the luminaries, they're moving around where we are, kind of like a chandelier over top of a room. So when we say that 1 year is 365.2422 days, what that means from the geocentric perspective, from the Earth perspective, is that it takes the sun that amount of time to arrive at the same spot on the ecliptic, which is a 360-degree ring that the sun travels upon. It's the path of the sun from our perspective moving through the sky. So all of the planets are essentially hugging that ecliptic line. The planets are following that line in the sky. Okay, so I'm using an application on my computer called Stellarium. And I'm going to position myself in the United States, and this is just to show you how fun it can be to really look at the sky and to really wrap your head around what is happening above us, to get a better understanding from our perspective on the Earth, how the movement of the various celestial bodies works. And there's all these different settings you can put onto this program. But this is just to show you quickly how the movement of the two basic movements of how a year works and the sun works. So right now I'm in the United States and I'm looking east, and it is February 16th, 2025, so in the future, and I put the time at 10 in the morning. So let's put it up to 12 noon. And I want to show you, so if I look at the ecliptic at noon on that day in this area on Earth, I have the sun here, and I turned off the brightness so I can see the planets and everything else. So as you can see, Saturn's here. None of the planets are going to move very far from this line in the sky, this path of the sun, the ecliptic. All the planets stay really near the ecliptic. I think they don't move past 11 degrees, but I have to check that. But they're hugging this line. And so say I go to, so I want to show you the first motion here. If we speed time up a little bit, you'll see the celestial sphere moving in that direction. As the sun moves towards the west, and it starts to go down. It's starting to move west. You see the sphere moving in this direction. Now it's interesting because there's another motion happening. That motion is the planets are moving in the opposite direction. So if I jump a day, see how the sun moves on that ecliptic line at the exact same time? Let's put it back to noon. If I go to the exact same time and I jump 1 day, the sun is on a different spot on this ecliptic. So here I'm jumping days. You see Mercury flying over there. And then you see I'm jumping days. The sun stays on this line, but the other planets are moving around it, are hugging the line, but not exactly on the line. So I'm jumping days. So if I went back to this day, March 11th, this would be a day of a Saturn Sun conjunction day. We would say that would be in the zodiac, in a chart, we would say that's a Saturn Sun conjunction. You see Venus up here. You see the planets moving along that ecliptic line. Here Venus is retrograde. Venus is going in the opposite direction until it goes conjunct again. So while you see the sun in the sky moving in this direction as the day goes, and the whole celestial sphere is tilting in that direction and is shifting in that direction, the planets are actually going in the opposite direction on the ecliptic. So the sun just keeps its steady path through the sky. So, and another quick thing I want to show you is that you have to keep in mind is that if I look west now, that depending on the month, that ecliptic is going to change. And the reason why the ecliptic line changes, see it goes at a different area of the sky, is because of the shifting of the sun, the pivoting of the sun, because of the solstices and equinoxes. And I encourage, so you see how the path is changing because the sun is changing its positioning according to It'll land at certain points in the sky and then begin going in the opposite direction. There's this movement, this pivoting of the sun, which are the solstice and equinox points. But this is for you to explore. I don't want to jump too far in it. You can spend hours just playing with this application. It's really fun. And really quick, I want to show you, if I went to another place on Earth, say here in South America, that ecliptic is going to change as well. So the complexity of the position of where we are on Earth, the position, the alignments of the ecliptic are all going to shift depending on where we are on Earth. But that basic premise is still there, that you see the sun moving towards the west, going down, but if you jump a day, it's going in the opposite direction on the ecliptic line. So you see it's going through Gemini. So for people who are sidereal astrologers, they'll say, oh, the sun's in the literal sign of Gemini now. And then here the sun's moving, and then eventually there's that Sun-Jupiter conjunction right there, while Jupiter is exalted in Cancer. And so that is, and then there's Mercury catching up. So you see, from our perspective, how the bodies are moving, how the planets are moving above us. So from the heliocentric perspective, that kind of disk is said that all of the planets are revolving around the sun. But from the geocentric perspective, you're seeing that the sun creates that line and all of the planets are basically following the sun. And you could say the sun is the king and all of the other planets have this kind of attribution to the king, or they are as the moving bodies, the moving stars, the wandering stars as they're called. The sun is creating their path, and that path is the ecliptic. So from our perspective, we see how all of the planets are following the lead of the sun, you can say. So what many people don't remember or they don't take into consideration is that the planets don't have a fixed speed. The sun moves at a rate of roughly 1 degree per day on the ecliptic. But that rate that it moves has a variation to it. So for example, the sun will fluctuate from moving between 57 minutes 10 seconds to 1 degree 3 minutes per day. So some days it'll move at 57 minutes, some move at 58 minutes per day along the ecliptic, other days a little bit faster than 1 degree. So there's a variation between the speed that the sun is moving, and all the planets have different speeds. So that gives an average speed of 59 minutes, 8 seconds a day that the sun moves, which then has to add an extra 5.2422 days to complete a full revolution around the ecliptic. So it's not fully 1 degree, so it's as if the sun's the average speed is slower. If it was 1 degree per day exactly and never changed, we would get that perfect 360. So Jeremy's question is, did an ancient cataclysm result in the speed of the sun as we see it slowing down, which causes us to experience more days? And it's certainly possible that a cataclysmic event caused time to slow down and the sun to take an extra 5 days or so to move along the ecliptic. But the problem is that all of the planets, as I just was saying, have a variation of speed. They all slow down and they all speed up, and so they all have average speeds. So as you can see, there's so many different avenues you could go down. There are many hypotheticals. And you can think about how, say, if time had to be sped up, how would that affect life on Earth? And if there are these Yuga periods, the Iron, Bronze, Silver, and Golden Ages, how would the change of the speeds of the planets affect life on Earth in these different periods of time? And another idea is that giants or all human beings were at least 12 feet tall and maybe even larger. And those were the beings that lived on Earth in the past. How would the variation in time be affecting their bodies? And in our day and age, taller people, they tend to have a shorter life expectancy. So would that have been much different in past ages? How could they have lived longer? We have all of these different kinds of records, and in the Bible is one where Jeremy references of beings living over 500 to 1,000 years. So I believe that the Bronze Age was the age just prior to our current Iron Age, and that in that period of time, people lived at least to 500 years old, possibly up to a couple of thousand years old. So at the beginning of the Kali Yuga, in the way that I've kind of thought about it, and the way that I've kind of pondered it over the years, the beginning of the Kali Yuga, which is the end of the classic Vedic texts, when Krishna leaves the earth, Kali Yuga begins. The Kali Yuga is the beginning of what we call mainstream history. And our mainstream history, starting with Sumerians, is said to be the beginning in the official textbooks. But to me, that was just the beginning of the Kali Yuga. So, and then the Bible is referenced to have been begun more or less around that time in Mesopotamia with Adam and Moses and Abraham living these, Noah specifically living all these hundreds of years. And I think he lived up to 950 years or something. So I think that gradually the larger beings were getting kind of phased out as the Kali Yuga began more. And many of them could have been wiped out by the major flood that's recorded throughout history. Many civilizations have this massive flood, so many of them could have been wiped out at that time. And there are many also explorers throughout history, and during the colonial times, they have come upon people who are giants, massive people. And sometimes those giants were extremely hostile, little colonies of them, and sometimes they were too docile and they were basically wiped out. So there were remnants of giants up until within the past about 1,000 years. And of course, giants in the human genetics is still there. We still have very tall people, but in the Kali Yuga, we're told by the Vedic scholars that human beings don't live for very long and are very small. So in the Srimad Bhagavatam, I couldn't find references to how long people lived in the other yugas, but there's the reference that human beings live up to 50 years during the Kali Yuga. And Sri Prabhupada has a purport, has a comment on one of the texts that he says that people lived up to hundreds of thousands of years in the past yugas, but I couldn't find that reference in the text itself. I just have his talking about it. So if there were different bodies and different lengths of time that human beings lived in past yugas, how would that be relating to how time is felt? Would there be no change whatsoever? Days and nights would be felt the same, or do days speed up? So there's a lot of angles that you could go into, but to me, one of the most interesting is how would those energetic environments that the Kali Yuga and the Dwapara Yuga and the Treta Yuga and the Satya Yuga, these major ages, how would those energetic atmospheres be more conducive to larger beings and beings that would live tens of thousands of years or hundreds of thousands of years, so to say. And when you think about our lives, you really have to hit the ground running as soon as we turn 15, 16. We have to leave the house, start to work. You have to get educated, you have to have a family, and by the time you're 30, 40 years old, you're packing in all these experiences, because by the time you're 50, 60, you're already towards the end. But imagine if you knew that everyone around you lived for 300, 400, 500 years, we wouldn't be in such a grind and a hurry to do so much in such a short period of time. You would spend until you're about 30, 40 years old educating yourself, 50 years old. And then after that, from 50 to say 100, you'd start to have a family, start raise your own kids. And then at 150, 200 years old, you'd be in your peak of your working life. And you're making enough money, so by the time you're 300 years old, you have all the money and resources you need. So from 300 to 500, the 200 years rest of your life, you could spend your life doing what you actually want to do. You're not in this grind of trying to make money and trying to just survive in the way that our compacted kind of slave lives are these days. Life would be much more stretched out, and you could actually develop your character and develop your spiritual side to a huge degree if we could live much longer in those energetic environments of these different ages that were more conducive to longer lived beings. So you have all of these possibilities. And then in that, when it comes to astrology and when it comes to how our realm operates, is somehow the is somehow the movement of the heavenly bodies different to be more conducive to those different environments that we are. Maybe time was even slower than it is felt today. Days were double the time and you just have more time. There's all these different kinds of ways you can go to thinking about how this could have worked. But again, it's all hypothetical, but these are really interesting thought experiments. So Jeremy says, what about in other solar systems? How would the astrological alignment and layout of each unique solar system impact the consciousness of the different planets within that system? Would that mean depending on what planet you're located on in our solar system, you would have different rays of energy hitting you, your personality and layout of your life? So yes, exactly. That's exactly how I picture it as well. But there's a couple points that I want to make about how to help visualize how our system works. But essentially, that's how I see it as well, is that if, and I've said this more than once, if a planet were to be removed from our, say one of the planets just all of a sudden disappears, we wouldn't have that force within our energetic makeup anymore. And if another planet was added, just the same, we would have something new, a new energetic construct within us. And in the Vedic literature, the three outer planets are never mentioned. Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto are never ever mentioned. So that's interesting. Did they know about those planets? Were they there? And you could say, of course, they were always there. There are some alchemical traditions that say that the more that consciousness grows, the more planetary bodies we observe, and the more that planetary bodies become relevant to our current energetic makeup. And so did the Vedic sages even have, or the Vedic, the ancient system of astrology, did they, and even the Roman and Greek, did they have those planets? Were they actually in the sky? Or they just didn't, they didn't have the telescopes to observe them. And of course that is the explanation. They couldn't see them because they're not available to the visible eye. Or somehow consciousness expand to make those bodies, heavenly bodies, that much more visible. Because you have to also keep in mind that all of the ancient civilizations, they were geocentric. And you could say they were more primitive, but look at the pyramids. The pyramids are designed to constellation, the Orion constellation. So they must, and no one can build the pyramids today. We are not exactly sure how they were built. We were told they were built by slaves dragging those blocks. That's probably the most difficult way you could imagine building them. But we have no way of building them today. These civilizations were advanced in their own ways, and they were extremely attuned with the alignment of the heavenly bodies. And so you have to keep in mind that how did they not know about those three extra planets? Did they just kind of skipped over them somehow? Why weren't they ever mentioned? Or did they call them something different? If they would spend so much of their energy building pyramids that are in exact alignment of constellations in the sky, and there are examples of this all across the world, of pyramids, and then we're only just basically beginning to discover there are pyramids in China that have been buried by Earth. So you have to keep in mind that all of these cultures were geocentric, and that the idea that I take is that we don't live on the surface of a globe, but we live in the middle of a globe, and that what's moving is the celestial sphere with us in the middle. And so that is the classic geocentric perspective, that we live on a stationary, you could say, plane, and that the celestial sphere is what moves. So there's a globe, but we're living in the middle. And there are many artistic depictions of this. And when you think about, and so this leads into all these kind of contemporary debates about geocentricism, and they're worth looking down, they're worth researching, but at the end of the day, which I'll talk about at the end, is kind of to relish in the mystery that we can't know absolutely everything, and to admit where there's a stopping point. Because I'm doing this Jupiter series now, the forces of consciousness, and one faulty Jupiter attribute is the wanting to know every single thing possible, this kind of science, to be able to to be able to put your hands on every single thing and not be able to admit there's things you don't know and feel content with that. So the inability to relish in the mysteries of life and admit that you don't know and be okay with that. Modern materialistic science claims to know everything, claims that every debate is settled by them, and that there are no mysteries, that whatever we see is there, and that really subtracts the spiritual dimension, the nebulous kind of non-visible perception of human beings. It kind of renders that useless. Jupiter is our ability to have this ability to perceive things beyond our normal human perception, the spiritual dimensions. Modern science is the opposite of that. We know everything, and the debate is done, don't question. That's kind of what their ethic is, because we already proved it from our experiments, etc. And so go down into those topics of discussion as much as you want. But when I started to look into geocentricism, and I started to entertain the ideas, listening to people who believe it, not listening to people who don't believe it explain it to you. If you want to learn something, you don't take someone who's against it to tell you what it is. They're going to leave things out. They have a bias. You have to listen to people who have the questions worked out and the answers worked out. Well, Google will make it so that when you search for it, you're only going to hear from the people who don't agree with those theories explain them to you, which is not a way to learn about something. You have to go to the people who actually believe it, people who are into it, people who are passionate about it. So when I started to entertain these ideas, and I thought, if the celestial sphere is what's moving, and the luminaries, the planets, the wandering stars, if they're close, they're not so far away, well, that's what would make astrology work. Because how could, say, Jupiter, let's use Jupiter in this video, if it's 400 million miles away from Earth, as we're told, and it's just this giant ball of gas, how is that giving any kind of spiritual energy? How is that giving an energetic reality to our world? So it's something that far from us, how would that affect us? The sun being tens of millions of miles away, how does that affect us on this other kind of etheric realm that astrology is operating on? So it comes down to having this curiosity, is that really, how would astrology work? And that's why people say astrology isn't real, is because they think of the heliocentric model and these planets being tens of millions, hundreds of millions of miles away. How could that affect our daily life? It doesn't make sense. But when you take the geocentric perspective, it makes perfect sense. And so use these as thought experiments. I don't get into these debates anymore. I kind of leave things to people's own imagination, leave them to themselves. I leave the debates to people who really want to dive into these ideas. I spent plenty of time myself privately going through them. And so, and it kind of what comes down to it is that you have to kind of take NASA's word for it, and they have to be the authority. And if you have to take their word for it, then you're taking their word for it. But critiquing NASA and showing flaws in what they say and showing outright deception on their part, they have a motivation to not have that discovered, because they make tens of billions of dollars, 50 million, 60 million a day. So tens of billions of dollars a year go to NASA. So if they were to all of a sudden not receive that funding, that would be catastrophic for them. So they have a reason to censor. They don't want these kinds of ideas to be spread because there's a lot at stake for them. So you see the rationale for not allowing these debates to flourish and to make the kinds of discussions that really investigate cosmology. Why does astrology work in the way that it does? To kind of shutter those to a certain niche of the internet and to censor them outright in many cases. And I want to use a really small piece of circumstantial evidence, I'll say it is, that I like to reference that kind of just, again, gives a kind of mysterious allure to it all. And so everyone knows the book 1984 by George Orwell, but there's this major statement made in that book, and we all know about how prophetic that book has been. So at the end, when the general, when he's torturing Winston, the main character, he makes this he's basically telling Winston how the ruling party rules. and he goes into the ideas that levitation is possible, and he goes into how the tyranny actually functions. And of course, all of these this has kind of become the playbook for our modern world. We say things are so Orwellian, but he makes these couple major statements that I want to mention here, and I just think they're really fascinating to see that Orwell said this. And was he just joking? Was it fiction? Was he being facetious? But he lays it in there, and kind of no one really mentions it, but here's what he said. So a little bit of background about 1984 if you haven't read the book. Essentially, the population is kept in a state of complete ignorance through the control of information by the uniparty. For example, everyone is told that they're at war with this distant continent, but no one can go to that continent, and no one can speak to anyone on that continent. So no one can verify if that's true or not. And the main character, his name is Winston, he's one of the people that destroys old newspaper articles forever that don't align with the current party stance. So the party dominates the people through force, but also through the complete control of information to keep them in a state of complete ignorance about the reality around them. So Winston, he rebels in his own way. He has a romantic relationship which is not allowed, and it's unauthorized. So essentially he gets captured by the party, and this intelligence chief, his name is O'Brien, he knows that he's going to be torturing Winston into mental submission in order to dominate him completely, because it's not enough to dominate a person physically, you have to dominate them mentally. And the phrase 2 + 2 = 5, to force a person to believe an untruth, that's the ultimate level of power according to O'Brien and to this party. But O'Brien knows he's going to be doing that, so he gives this time for Winston to ask questions about what he would like to know. And this is the point in the book where Orwell reveals the systems, the power strategies that are used in his book, but also what people would say is so prophetic, and how our current system uses power and uses information manipulation to control people. So this is a very revelatory section towards the end of the book. So Winston asks this question. He says, "But the whole universe is outside us. Look at the stars. Some of them are 1,000,000 light years away. They are out of our reach forever." "What are the stars?" said O'Brien indifferently. "They are bits of fire a few kilometers away, but we could reach them if we wanted to, or we could blot them out. The Earth is the center of the universe. The sun and the stars go round it." Winston made another convulsive movement. This time he did not say anything. O'Brien continued as though answering a spoken objection. "For certain purposes, of course, that is not true. When we navigate the ocean, or when we predict an eclipse, we often find it convenient to assume that the Earth goes around the sun and that the stars are millions upon millions of kilometers away. But what of it? Do you suppose it is beyond us to produce a dual system of astronomy? The stars can be near or distant according as we need them. Do you suppose our mathematicians are unequal to that? Have you forgotten doublethink?" So there he is saying that they can create a dual system of astronomy as they see fit, as they would need for the power's purposes, which then the reader would say, is a dual system of astronomy, has one been created? What is the actual truth? Well, Orwell keeps that essentially an open question. But why would he bring that topic up of cosmology in the first place if there wasn't something there that the party would need to use to control others? So in real life, because this book is about a critique of Soviet communism and about control systems in general, it's interesting that he would include an idea about cosmology being a part of the control apparatus. And of course, this isn't any kind of proof that we live in a geocentric world. It's just that it's very fascinating that Orwell would include this as a way for the party in the book to maintain power. And that the idea that it's possible to create dual systems of astronomy, and then alluding to, is it possible that there are dual systems of astronomy at play today used by those in power for control purposes. In conclusion to this long-winded answer to Jeremy's question, in this worldview of astrology operating, in the worldview that I kind of have worked it out, and I just kind of imagine it to be in this kind of way, and I don't claim to have all the answers, but I see it as Earth is a stage, and the planets and the stars, but specifically the planets, the wandering stars, are like spotlights onto the stage. So if we could see energetic wavelengths given by the planets to the naked eye, we would kind of see this subtle glow like stage lights would be all around our Earth at all times, kind of like how Carillion photography works. And so you can see the direct interaction between the planets and life on Earth from this way of seeing how it works, how astrology works. So consider this quote from Rudolf Steiner, one of the great spiritual, I guess you could say, visionaries of the 20th century. So this is his quote: "When looking today with one's physical eye through a telescope at the place where Jupiter is, one perceives a physical globe surrounded by moons. What was seen by the men of Atlantis when he lifted his clairvoyant gaze to that same point which we look at today with our physical eyes? The Atlanteans' eyes," so the Atlantean being the past civilization that had different psychic abilities, and he goes into a lot about what the Atlantean age was about. Completely different human experience. So the Atlanteans' eyes would have seen as little of what our sight sees today as we should if we looked at a light through a thick autumn fog. The eye of the Atlantean would not have seen the physical star Jupiter, but he would have seen that which is also united with Jupiter today, which the man of the present day does not see, which is the aura of Jupiter, a totality of spiritual beings, of which the physical Jupiter is only the external expression. Thus did the gaze of man before the Atlantean catastrophe sweep round the spaces of the world, seeing everywhere its spiritual content." So what he's saying is that in the past, you could actually perceive the spiritual energies coming from that point in the sky where Jupiter is, from where all the planets. You would be able to perceive the energy coming from them. And that could be, it's 400 million miles away, but you're still seeing the spiritual energy. So the heliocentricists say that it really is coming from 400 million miles away. But that, to me, kind of belies common sense a little bit. But in any case, astrology operates in this way where the spiritual energies are interacting with us at all times, like how a spotlight would be hitting a stage. If that spotlight was green, you would have a green glow over here, and we would have this cacophony of these mixtures of these different energies all the time. So if we were to, say, live on another planet, or within another planet, within another globe, and take a look at this image I want to put here about how the different universes in the Vedic context are seen. There are these different universes, there are these different kind of contexts. If we were to live within another sphere, another globe, we would be surrounded by other energetic forces. They would have whole different, you could call them solar systems, but they would be surrounded by other planets and other energetic expressions, which would then play into how that experience in that environment would be, in that particular realm would be experienced. And you could think of them like biospheres. Each biosphere has different conditions, and life plays out differently in each one. It's a different context altogether. So I say this a lot, and I use this in the context of how the forces of human consciousness work, these forces of human nature, which are the planetary energies, these higher energies, giving us certain expressions to give us very specific experiences in our realm. As Zecharia Sitchin says, because of the Anunnaki, if there's another planet that comes into our solar system, Nibiru, that's supposedly supposed to come, I don't know if that's true or not, but if that were to happen, another planet would enter into our realm. That planet's spiritual energy would then be permeated throughout our experience, and we would have a new layer to human experience. Just as how I was saying, when did the 3 outer planets officially get discovered in history? Were they always there, or are they somehow added to our experience? And these are all interesting things to contemplate. But say all of a sudden, wow, there's another planet in the sky and it's following the ecliptic. We have to give it a name. Well, it would take time to understand what that planet's actual energetic expression was, because it would be a new experience we're all feeling. And of course, astrology would be there in order to kind of experiment with where that planet is located and what experiences it gives. So it's a whole avenue of interesting things to think about. So also people who were born without that planet in the sky, then they wouldn't have it in their natal chart. So all the people who are born with it in the sky, they would then have it in their energetic makeup as they were left the womb. So they would have another layer to their consciousness. They would have another dimension that the people who were born without it in the sky wouldn't have. So you could say that consciousness could evolve in a certain way, that humanity would be advancing because there's a new energetic entity within our realm. And we would, human consciousness would be moving forward in a certain way because of that direct interaction of that planet with us. Because that new energetic force is in direct interaction with us. So this video is meant to just be kind of a way to kind of relish in the possibilities and to relish in the mystery and to kind of see things from that perspective of we know a lot less than we think we do, especially when we consider how the old Vedic sages, they were calculating time. Did time get skewed in some way? Because then we have to also consider all of the Yuga periods, how human beings were fundamentally different, the fact that human beings were much larger, and we have evidence all around the world to show that there were beings that were much bigger than us that lived at a certain period of time. And of course, contemplating how astrology actually works fundamentally, which is through this medium of the ether and the different kinds of rays, as is what Jeremy uses that word rays, like rays of energy interacting with us. And it would be different in other contexts, and you could say other solar systems, or in other biospheres or other realms or within other globes. They would have a different makeup, and say your soul was born in that realm, you would have a completely different experience than say a soul that's born in this realm, in this solar system experiences, because of those wandering stars having their unique qualities that are meant to be experienced specifically for this realm. So you have all of these different possibilities of different universes and different experiences in each and every one.